Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Duncan Winburn, and I'm in the ninth grade here at Westwood High School. In March and April, I had the opportunity to travel with Dr. Richardson to Italy and Greece. It was an amazing, once-in-a-lifetime experience that ended too quickly. I could have stayed right here and not moved for years. The places we visited were beautiful, magical, majestic, holy. They represented the best of nature and of history and of today. What we saw was what the country's tourism industry wants us to see. And I don't mean that badly at all. After all, isn't the best in the U.S. exactly what we want our visitors to see? There are many people who make their living working in these industries, helping people see the best in their country. And there were many, many things to see in Italy and Greece, just like there are in the U.S. Even the truck stops were amazing. If you've ever noticed, as you travel around the U.S., truck stops have the best bathrooms. Not only did they have great food, and how they treated their customers were great, a lot of cheap souvenirs, but their restrooms had toilet seats. Rest of the country, not so much. As we looked on to Italy and Greece, from the majesty of Mount Vesuvius to the ancient wonder that is the Colosseum, to the tranquil waters of Greece, it was hard to imagine that there was any other side to what we were seeing. But then again, it's hard to imagine a darker side to the U.S. and South Carolina. Our school has been part of the Globalized 13 initiative for a while now, and they want to educate us on the slavery that still exists today. I have been captivated by what I've learned from them, and I've learned a great many things about what's going on. I've learned about the 13th Amendment in middle school, but I thought that when they signed the Emancipation Proclamation back then, that slavery was over. It was done. There was no more slavery in the U.S. But as it turns out, that's not true. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. We're going to learn what slavery is, and we're going to see if it still exists today or not. And we're about to learn the definition of slavery in the next slide. And this is it right here. Slavery has two definitions. One is where someone is treating someone else like mobile property that you can move around. And the other definition is when one person dominates another. That form of slavery ended a long time ago, but in ancient Greece, back then in ancient Greece, they had, it was bigger than Italy. They had a great empire in Greece, but they also had a lot of slavery. And when Hold on a second, I'm sorry. Yeah, and when they conquered their lands, they took the smartest, the prettiest, and basically the best as slaves. And compared to the rest of the ancient world, it is generally believed that they treated their slaves better than a lot of other slave countries. But they were still considered disposable because they had conquered so many lands and had so many slaves that it wasn't a big deal when they died off. Greece even controlled most of Italy at the time, and one of the most valuable places there was the city of Pompeii. You probably know Pompeii because of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. But it was actually a huge trade city, trading in everything from all around the Mediterranean and into the east. These included slaves, which were bought and sold at a large square at the top of the city. The more exotic the slaves looked, the more valuable they were, and the higher the price that could be paid. Most slaves that were sold left to go to the home of their new master, but those that stayed were identifiable by a belt they wore. This poor slave girl was pregnant when Mount Vesuvius erupted. You can see her face down, trying to cover her face, and the belt can be seen under her stomach. Slaves were used for all kinds of things, but in Pompeii, they had a section of the city that was just for the sex trade. I have heard that the oldest profession is prostitution, but I believe that slavery must be older than that. Rome came later, but adopted almost all of the Greek beliefs in government, religion, and slavery. It is generally believed, though, that as a whole, Roman citizens did not treat their slaves well. But there were exceptions, especially if the owner didn't have much money and they wanted their slaves' loyalty. Just like in Pompeii, slaves looked just like everyone else. The Roman Senate considered having these slaves wear unique clothing, but this never happened because Rome feared that if the slaves knew how many of them there were, they would band together and rebel. So they would mark or brand their slaves in a way that was easily identifiable but couldn't be as easily seen. Cruelty ran rampant in many cases, causing despair among the slaves. Some even killed their children as soon as they were born because they didn't want their children to be taken, sold, and forced to live the life that they had to live. For the lucky few who possessed talent or were very strong, they had a better chance of being treated well. Roman society really liked their entertainment, and any slave that could help them provide better entertainment was highly valued. In order to ensure these slaves did their best, they were often promised freedom at some period of time. For those that were gladiators, well, they just had to survive long enough until that period of time was over. The famous story of Spartacus was of a slave gladiator who escaped, led rebellion, and almost won. In our own colonial times, slaves in the U.S. didn't need belts or brands. The color of their skin, whether black people from Africa or brown Native Americans, said that they were a slave. Branding was the way ownership was usually documented. While civilization had come a long way and had long since condemned the slavery of ancient times, white people in the colonies justified themselves by saying that they were white and therefore superior. or they were promising food and shelter, and in exchange they wanted labor. African and Native American peoples were bought and sold in squares like the one in Charleston, where a flea market now stands. It was possible for a slave to get free and have normal life. When done so voluntarily by the slave's owner, it was called manumission. This was a very formal process in Rome, more informal in Greece. In the U.S., slaves that were, quote-unquote, freed were usually rescued or escaped to places where slavery was against the law. And in the U.S., the 13th Amendment was passed 150 years ago, outlawing slavery. So, like I said, slavery is gone, outlawed, kaput. No more slavery in the U.S., right? I wish. I really do. Human trafficking. Here is the definition. Compare it to what we already know about slavery. It's basically the same, isn't it? At least in this definition, it acknowledges that it's a crime. The problem is, that doesn't stop it. Like in ancient times, Greece still values the most exotic-looking people from all over the world. Human trafficking is a very big problem in Greece, and the country's financial situation only makes it worse. In some desperate situations, women are forced by their parents to leave their house until they come back with a certain amount of money or something else that their family needs. The government doesn't have the resources to truly combat the issue, and the jail time and fines are much less than they should be. In Italy, the situation seems much worse. But the country is a big center for international trade and is full of port cities. The country is one of the few in Europe that welcomes refugees from other countries. And because they work hard to stop human trafficking, this might be why they seem to have more of it when perhaps they really don't. The figures are hard to trust because the traffickers hide, but that's still a quarter of the European victims that Italy has. In fact, both numbers on the board are probably higher. In the U.S., things aren't much better. Here, people are enticed into coming into the U.S. to the land of opportunity based on false promises. There is a lot of migrant work that is legitimate, so unwary people come thinking that they're going to have the same work when they find themselves as basically slaves. Women especially fall victim, find themselves in the sex trade instead. Their visas, passports, and other documents are taken from them. They have no money, and they cannot go anywhere because they're convinced by their captors that if they go to the police, then they're going to go to jail. And in these other countries, jail is much worse than it is in the States, so it terrifies them. On another note, like Italy, the U.S. traffics for agricultural labor. Is that not exactly like what most colonial slaves did back in the day? But these are women from other countries. U.S. women also fall victim. They find themselves with a boyfriend who lavishes them with attention and what they think is love. These pimps look for women that are vulnerable, who have a bad home life or none at all, who either would not be missed quickly or are too ashamed to seek help. They are often taken far from home. Sometimes the victims are girls or boys that run away with their new boyfriends or girlfriends. These pimps get them on drugs, and then they will do anything to get more drugs. When we see this connection between slavery, which is supposedly gone, and human trafficking, can we really say that slavery no longer exists? In the U.S., one person can be kidnapped and held for ransom, then released unharmed, but their captors, if caught, could spend life in prison. Take a whole bunch of people who are being bought and sold and raped and starved for years, and the people who are responsible are getting just 4 to 5 years in prison. Can anyone in this room explain to me why this makes sense? There is a big move to change that to 15 years to life, and many states have already taken a big stand, but it isn't enough. The statistics are staggering. Listed here are the numbers, but these represent real people. Authors and filmmakers are trying to raise awareness of the situation by using the mediums that they know best. Lots of people are trying to help, but it isn't enough. More of us have to step up and use our talents and resources to make a difference. I'm in the 9th grade. What can I do? What can you do? A lot. There are real heroes out there that are making a difference. A long time ago, before the Civil War, brave people started something called the Underground Railroad. It wasn't actually a railroad. It was a network of people and places and hideouts where slaves were rescued and moved far away to where they couldn't be found. All kinds of people, from the spies working undercover to some very wealthy socialites, using their money to pay for the enterprise, to people in the media making the world aware of what was really happening with slaves. All of these many diverse people came together to make a difference. These people are like the Underground Railroad, using what they know and the talent that they have to create a net that can rescue trafficking victims. They need help. They need us. These pictures are from Florida and are the result of just normal people who paid attention and spoke up instead of turning away. People were arrested and victims were helped. There are many things we can do to help. Here is a list, but what it boils down to is to pay attention, speak up, and not turn away. Be brave enough to do something. From there, special things can happen. A woman we were talking to at church said that she heard of a woman who had been arrested many times for prostitution. Finally, someone on the police force was kind to her and asked, and suddenly the woman was brave enough to say what was really going on. She had run away from home to be with her new boyfriend when she was only 15 or 16. Her family told her that if she left, she could never come back. Once she realized what was happening, she was so scared and ashamed that she didn't try to run away. She was not allowed to keep any of the money she made and had nothing, not even a driver's license. It took one police officer to speak up and make a difference. But how many times are these victims so close to help, but because no one is paying attention and no one is asking, the victims stay quiet in fear? And we need to not think that we are safe. Think of all the pictures of missing kids. When we went on our tour in Italy and Greece, we were warned never, ever to leave the group. We need to always be on the alert for ourselves and each other. Together, we can make a difference. 150 years ago, there was a generation that said enough. They took the 13th Amendment and made it law. In just my grandparents' generation, they took what many said would never happen and ushered in the civil rights movement, which gave equal rights to those of different races, genders, and even to people with disabilities. Because they and my parents' generation did that and made a law called IDEA, I get to go to school with all of you. If not for that, I wouldn't have been allowed in. So today, what will our generation do? Do we have the bravery to stop human trafficking for real? Not just in the US, but all over the world? Are you ready to free a slave? Remember, your values today in class will be your values tomorrow when you're running things. So value the world, and together we can make it a better place, both tomorrow and today. Thank you.